Welcome to the May 2026 edition of FO Exclusive. With me is Glenn Cowell. He's a senior partner at FOI. FOI advises companies, funds, investors, and other organizations on geopolitical risk. I am Atul Singh. I'm the founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of Fair Observer. We are a non-profit with more than 3,000 authors from over 90 countries. I'm also a partner at FOI. Without further ado, we will get cracking into the meat of our FO Exclusive. Last month, we focused on one key issue. US-Israel-Iran war will change global economy and world order. This month, we focus on two key issues. Number one, a tale of two summits in Beijing, and number two, great dangers to the global economy. Before we dive into these two meaty matters, we will recap the key events and issues and trends of the month. So let's kick off with the World Health Organization declaring an outbreak of Ebola to be a public health emergency of international concerns. Reports on various media channels, publications, and indeed other sources tell us that currently the virus is killing up to half of those who catch the virus. The epidemic in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, is thought to have killed hundreds. Some estimate is 220, others are in the high 100s. But the estimate is that hundreds have died already and thousands are suspected to be infected. Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, he is the head of WHO. He has said that the east of DRC is at the center of a catastrophic collision of disease and conflict, with the Ebola outbreak in Ituri province outpacing the response. Now, Pope Leo XIV has called for. Now, let's move on to the second important thing.
Before you get to that, Atul, sorry, let me jump in. I've worked in that part of Congo many years ago, and it's something that's, I think, literally just about beyond the imagination of anyone who lives in a economically developed society. I saw countless people living literally with no clothing. They were so bereft of anything. They literally were naked, and they were living in holes in the side of little hillocks that they had scratched out with their hands. It's a completely lawless state of nature with dozens of armed bands because they have to try to survive somehow. And it's turned into, and has been for many, many years, an indescribably terrible place for humans to live. The only silver lining, and this is not said to be witty at all, is that Ebola is such a terrible killer that it is a terrible virus, meaning that its transmission becomes more difficult and widespread spread, given how lethal it is. Something that is less lethal spreads more quickly, but it's an indescribably awful place for human beings to have to try to survive. And now with this affliction, it's inconceivable.
Yeah, and Glenn alluded to it. We will not dive into the details of Eastern Congo. That's where a lot of illegal mining occurs. That's where you have interference by other countries. That's where you have a lot of armed gangs jostling for control of the revenues of illegal mining. We could carry on, but this situation does not make it easy to have medical care, to have preventive vaccination campaigns, or for that matter, even instituting ways to stop the spread of disease, because refugees from that part of the world flee widely. Number two, let's move on to the second thing. that caught our attention this month. Pope Leo XIV, and it's very interesting that the Pope chose the name Leo. We won't get into that too much. That'll be the subject of a longer piece on Fair Observer. Pope Leo XIV has called for AI to be disarmed. In his first encyclical, Magnifica Humanitas, literally translates as magnificent humanity, he has said that AI's risks, whether it is in war or politics, are immense. AI has to be tamed. Pope Leo was flanked by Christopher Olah, co-founder of US AI giant Anthropic. This is the Pope's first encyclical. The Pope also included one of the strongest and most comprehensive apologies from the Vatican for the Catholic Church's role in slavery. Of course, that dates back some centuries in the past. But still, that apology is important, and many Africans have welcomed the apology. Ghana, if I remember correctly, has welcomed the apology. Importantly, though, Pope Leo XIV drew parallels between the historical tragedy of traditional slavery and the emerging threats of new digital slaveries. So clearly, the Pope is touching upon something important. The Pope has got a lot of publicity. Remember that popes do bring out encyclicals on important current issues. Lest we forget, Pope Francis, Pope Leo's predecessor, wrote Laudato Si, which discussed climate crisis, discussed the climate crisis, and then followed it up in 2023, talking about his disappointment about the inaction. So maybe nothing will occur because of this encyclical. Nothing occurred because of the last encyclical. Nevertheless, it is certainly now beyond, the conversation has moved beyond technology and has intervention from someone who's supposed to be infallible. After all, we have the doctrine of papal infallibility. So it's moved from the technological to the religious realm. And speaking of religion, who better to shine the light on this month than Elon Musk, the great god of our era, the great internet god, the great technological god, the great social media god. Anyway, so long story short, he was in news for three reasons. Number one, his facial expressions in Beijing, where he was part of Donald Trump's entourage. Number two, Musk lost his courtroom battle with OpenAI and its CEO Sam Altman. The jury took just 2 hours to reject the case, and Musk sought damages from OpenAI for allegedly reneging on a contract with him as a co-founder. Remember, Altman and Musk were co-founders, and they had planned to run the firm as a non-profit instead of a for-profit entity. Musk, of course, takes objection to OpenAI becoming a for-profit and proceeding to an IPO. Nevertheless, he lost the case. But there's some good news for Elon Musk. Spaceship X's blockbuster IPO has taken off like one of Musk's rockets. Over to you, Glenn. You want to talk about the 12th launch of Starship?
I do. Whatever one may think of Elon Musk, and there are many things to think about him and the effects he has on society in various ways. The Starship, which is his experimental rocket, the most revolutionary rocket in history, launched for its 12th test launch and moved. It was largely successful. There were issues, but it is fundamentally, it was a success and brings this rocket probably to within 2 years of or less of being operational. It will be involved in the U.S.'s return to the moon. with humans going to Mars. And probably most importantly, actually, it is an exponential change in the cost and capabilities of rockets. It will be a fully reusable rocket, meaning that you fly it up, you bring it back, and you use it again, so that the costs of launching a kilo to orbit, which now costs roughly $3,000 for the most efficient rocket currently being used in the world, which is also a SpaceX rocket called the Falcon 9, will drop by more than 2 orders of magnitude, so that in the initial launches, it will cost $100 perhaps per kilo instead of $3,000, and could drop as low as $10 to $20 a kilo. And all of that could happen within the next several years. So this 12th launch brings that rocket to the cusp of operational ability, and that will change the history of space flight and the use of space for unimagined human activities.
And just as the cost of Elon Musk's rocket is dropping, so is British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer's political standing. Poor Starmer is in a hot soup. Labour suffered a heavy defeat in local elections in Scotland and Wales, and indeed England. The Reform UK, the populist party led by Nigel Farage, emerged triumphant and is on course to be the biggest party in the next general elections in 2029. Obviously, political sharks have sensed blood. They are circling around Starmer. Remember, Starmer won a landslide in 2024, but as the managing partner of FOI, Sanjay Acharya, pointed out when he crunched the numbers, it was a very thin majority. The vote share wasn't great. The number of votes wasn't that great. And Starmer, after winning that election, has failed to ignite the imagination of the party or the country. So what has happened now? Well, cabinet ministers have resigned. A leadership challenge is imminent. Some have already challenged for leadership, but the formal process hasn't really kicked off. Andy Burnham, the mayor of Manchester, known as the King of the North, he has thrown his hat in the fray, not officially, but basically he's going to try and enter Parliament if he can beat reform. Angela Rayner, a popular working-class politician who resigned after a bit of a scandal. She's a presence. She's popular with the rank and file of the Labour Party. And Wes Streeting, the former health secretary who resigned and weakened Starmer just a few days ago, he is also planning to run. So these are just some of the rivals now angling for the throne. So the UK continues with political instability. What began in 2016 with Brexit continues 10 years later. The UK, historically a very stable parliamentary democracy, is now fundamentally unstable. Now let's talk about Germany. The US will be withdrawing 5,000 of the 36,000 American troops stationed in Germany. Why? Well, apparently German Chancellor Friedrich Merz was with school children, and he remarked that an entire nation is being humiliated by Iranian leadership. By nation, he meant the US, of course. And once this happened in April, in May, there was the predictable reaction. US President Donald Trump did not take kindly to this comment. The US will be withdrawing a significant number of troops from Germany, a historical ally after World War II, the front line of the Cold War, the place where many US, or at least 2 US presidents, gave very memorable speeches by the Berlin Wall. The US will not be stationing Tomahawks and other mid-range missile systems in Germany, despite a 2024 agreement. It seems contracts, agreements, treaties, international law mean little these days. The US has also imposed a 25% tariff on European car makers, which hits Germany hardest. some analysts are calling this a historic rupture. Our friends in Germany, those in politics, believe that Germany has to move away from the American embrace. And they point to Merz's call for European unity when he won the German elections in 2025 and said, we need to achieve unity, quote, so that step by step we can achieve independence from the US, unquote. Perhaps a chain of events has been set in motion. Yes, but of course, there's always a twist because although Trump has said no more troops in Europe, he has announced 5,000 additional troops to Poland. So maybe the troops in Germany just moved to Poland and are right on the Russian border. Well, we will see. We will see what transpires. Certainly not good on the whole for US-German relations or even US-EU relations, and certainly not good for NATO. Now let's talk about, we've talked about Friedrich Merz, the center-right German chancellor. Now let's talk about the Greens and progressives who dominate Amsterdam City Council. They have banned advertising of meat and fossil fuels. Now this is a very important development because historically the Netherlands, as much of Northern Europe, has been meat eating, and of course fossil fuels have powered the automobile revolution and more. But now there is a broader movement in Europe, and to a lesser extent in the US and Canada, to preserve the environment, to mitigate humanity's footprint on the environment. And this means that they are campaigning for more green energy, less fossil fuels. They're also campaigning for less meat, particularly beef, because that leads to not just carbon dioxide, but methane, more importantly, methane emissions. And so this is major because Amsterdam historically has been a pioneer, not just when it comes to capitalism, not just when it comes to many democratic practices, paper currencies, shipbuilding, trade, commerce, but Amsterdam could well be a pioneer of what is to come in the Western world. Now,
lest one be inclined to facetiousness about local government authorities, I should point out that when I was living in Cambridge, on the Kremlin on the Charles, as some people have called it, the Cambridge City Council passed an ordinance declaring Cambridge, Massachusetts, a nuclear weapon-free zone. And for 50 years, this policy has been a resounding success. There are no nuclear weapons in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So we then might conclude that Amsterdam is onto something.
If Amsterdam represents the Greens in the Western world, Canada represents the other opposite. Or I shouldn't say Canada. I stand corrected. Alberta represents the other opposite. So Alberta will be conducting a referendum on staying or leaving Canada. Should we stay or should we go? Prime Minister Mark Carney, who was governor of the Bank of England and observed Brexit at close quarters, has called the referendum a very dangerous bluff. Now, some very quick facts about Alberta. This is a Western Canadian state of 5 million people, lies to the east of British Columbia, a state that Glenn knows well. Glenn has visited Vancouver, I believe, quite a few times. Alberta is roughly the size of Texas. It's abundant in oil and gas. Politically, it leans to the right, or you could say conservative. Albertan Premier Daniel Smith announced the referendum on 21 May and supports a unified Canada, but importantly, support for Albertan independence has been rising. Many Albertans are frustrated with environmental policies that they believe have stood in the way of building pipelines and unlocking resources from the oil and gas-rich province. They also believe that Alberta contributes far more to Canada than it receives, and that Ottawa, Canada's national capital, has a disproportionate say in Alberta's internal matters. There's a term quite popular in Canada called Western alienation. This term is used to describe the political alienation in Western Canadian states. Voters in these states often feel overlooked and underrepresented by federal politicians in Ottawa. This is not new. This happens all around the world in big countries. You could argue that Mississippi feels similarly aggrieved with Washington. Perhaps so does California. But worryingly for Mark Carney and many Canadians, some Albertans increasingly say that they have more in common with the US than with Canada. So if not Canada, at least a part of Canada could choose to join the US, but that is unlikely, at least in this referendum. So now that we've talked about Canada and alluded to the Trump administration's or Donald Trump's desire to assimilate Canada into the US, let's talk about another country which is bang on the radar for the US, and that is Cuba. And here the Trump administration has hit Cuba with an oil blockade, sanctions, and now an unprecedented murder indictment against former leader Raul Castro. Who's Raul? Raul is the brother of Fidel Castro. He is a youthful 95. He was president from 2008 to 2018. He holds the title Leader of the Cuban Revolution. This indictment has come at a time when Cuba is suffering from extensive blackouts for months caused by chronic fuel shortage. Popular discontent is running high. People are banging pots and pans in the evenings. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has called Cuba a national security threat and said the likelihood of a peace agreement is not high. Cuban Minister Bruno Rodriguez has accused Rubio of trying to instigate a military aggression and the Trump administration of ruthlessly and systematically attacking Cuba. Cuba's Communist Party leaders view themselves as inheritors and continuers of Fidel Castro's 1959 Cuban Revolution. What happened then? Well, Castro brothers and Che Guevara ousted the pro-US strongman Fulgencio Batista. They established a communist regime. They declared themselves to be anti-imperialism. That's a hallmark of the island's governments. And because of this communist government, a number of Cubans fled to the US and are deeply opposed to the regime. Note that Marco Rubio is a Cuban American. We could dive further into this, but more about this another time. The wet dream of a lot of people in the administration, and some of them have told me in person, is to do to Cuba what they did to Venezuela. Get rid of the current leaders, bring in change, and bring Cuba into Pax Americana. This is in keeping with the new national security strategy, the desire of the Trump administration to dominate the Western Hemisphere, what people call the Dondro Doctrine, or the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Enough said about all the events and trends. Obviously, this is not comprehensive. We are leaving a lot of things out. But in the interests of time, we will move on.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.